Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to The Truth. I'm your host, one you love the most, Niall Hesson, back with a brand new episode here on The Truth. Back once again with my boy AJ Ponciano. AJ, how you doing today? You're rocking a new stash, looking ready, like you're getting ready for 2025. How's it going?
I'm doing great. 25, it's going to be a new year, new me, new pitcher AJ, just all new, something new.
What's kind of sad is I think because I'm always been accustomed to you having some type of facial hair that like you had like a beard going or something. Like, why is this mustache so distinct?
I don't know, honestly. I kind of shaved it the other day and then just kind of came back different.
Oh, so this is like a recent
Yeah,
thing.
no, it kind of shocked me. Like one day I was like, you know what, it was just shave. It's been a while.
Because what were you rocking? Like, literally, we recorded what on Tuesday or Monday? Like, what were you rocking then? Or is it just not grown to that level
It
yet?
just wasn't grown to that level. I shaved it probably last weekend and then started to come out that last time we recorded and then kind of just turned
I
around.
gotta go back and look because, like, it looks like in a way you just took your mustache, you just dyed it black, and like, it really like filled itself out. Which, like, if you guys can tell, like, for me, I have a hard time growing anything. At least not to the level of ages. But when you hopped on the show, man, I was like, what is going on? I love it. I think it's great. I've always loved seeing those, like, I guess pitchers or players in general, like the Paul Skeens or whatever of the world, with like just a killer mustache that
Yeah.
like sets it apart. So I'm digging it. I'm curious. You're like, well, it just grew back a different way. Like,
Yep.
that'd be interesting to see what happens there. But enough facial hair talk. We are back with another episode here in The Truth. Week 16 for some, actually probably for most, week 2 of fantasy or the second week of week 1. And then obviously for those that haven't started playoffs yet, it has to be the start of week 1 unless you're a weird 2 week system in 17 and 18, which is not even defeats the purpose in my opinion. But anyways, today we're going to give you guys our start, sit, sleepers, and busts. At the time of recording, it is just before the Thursday night game, so we do not know the result of that game, but still a lot of games here on Sunday and Monday in the NFL. Go ahead and give me your 3 starts for Week 16.
Yeah. First one going to be Chase Brown. I think he's solidified himself as a must start. Someone has David Montgomery. In that league, I also have Chase, who's on the bench, and I'm starting Chase this week. And I probably would start him over Montgomery either way. For this next week, just because I know even with Montgomery without the injury, I think Chase has just proven his upside so much up there, and especially in the receiving game. Going against Browns defense, who's bottom 10 in the league. They've given up 19 rushing touchdowns up to this point, which is tied for second most given up behind the 22 that the Cowboys have given up to this point. Next up, James Conner. I've been a James Conner hater. I will admit it. I haven't really trusted him up to this point, and these last couple weeks, he's turned it around completely. I can trust him now. I feel like, and I get it's really late in the season. You're in playoffs, but he's really proven to me the last couple weeks. Both in the rushing and receiving game. He's also going against the Panthers, who is getting the most rushing yards, by almost 400 more than the Giants up to this point, and also 19 rushing touchdowns given up. Same with the Browns, tied for the second most given up. Just a great matchup for him going into that game. And then lastly, I'm going to go with JSN. JSN, I mean, I wouldn't say he's emerged as that number one wide receiver for this team because DK is obviously still there, but DK is dealing with injuries, and JSN, he's stepped up to the plate and he's hit home runs every single week. I mean, it seems like that is Gino's go-to guy for the most part. Last week had a really solid week. This week, he's got a pretty good matchup as well, going against the Vikings. The Vikings' great run defense, usually playing from ahead, so teams are playing from behind. So just a lot of passing yards there. Vikings give the fourth most passing yards up to this point, just over 3,700. One thing is they only give up 19 passing touchdowns to 20 interceptions, so great there defensively. But JSN, I wouldn't be surprised he goes out 5, 6 catches, 90 yards. I mean, that's a very typical game. I don't know if he finds the end zone because of how well his run defense has been, but I would say for sure a lot of targets, a lot of yards for him.
So for me, my 3 starts first is going to be Hunter Henry. I mean, I think Hunter Henry was a solid option going into fantasy drafts. He's right on the fringe there of tight end one in a 12-man league, sitting at the 11th position best tight end. Had an up and down year to say the least, but I think in fairness, the Patriots offense has had an up and down year. Sometimes it's looked great, sometimes it's looked bad. I will give Drake May a lot of credit. I think overall for a rookie, you got to be pleased with what he's done, especially with how bad that offensive line has played. which I think benefits May more than Jacoby Brissett because May is able to use his legs very efficiently and move outside the pocket, whereas Jacoby Brissett, man, that dude would get clobbered. And I remember watching Patriots games back when I had some shares of Ramondre, and I'd be like, man, there's no way that they should throw Drake May into this dumpster fire of an offensive line. But, Jacoby Brissett would get plowed. And I'm like, all right, you know what? Drake May is able to move out of the pocket and make some plays. He has had a little bit of a turnover bug, but regardless, he's established a good connection with Hunter Henry. I mean, the highest of highs, Hunter Henry's 8 catches, 92 yards, and a score. He only has 1 touchdown in the year, but I'm looking at those 8 for 92, 7 for 56, 6 for 63, like just average numbers there. And then obviously in the low, like any tight end, 1, 2 receptions. So hasn't gotten more than 20 points. It's only because he's gotten 1 touchdown. And that game he got a touchdown was 3 catches for 41 yards. I understand it's going to be a difficult situation in Buffalo, but we also just saw the Buffalo defense give up a lot of points to the Detroit Lions. I think the opportunity is there. I think this guy or Hunter Henry is going to be a guy towards the end of the year that gets those extra 1 or 2 touchdowns and could be a difference maker. I'm really considering starting him over Jake Ferguson in one of my leagues just because I feel like I'm going to get more consistency than I would with Ferguson, especially with all the injuries that he's dealt with. Secondly, I'm going to go with Devontae Adams. Now, Devontae Adams had a little bit of a slow start when he got traded to the Jets, but he's really picked it up as of late. Especially the last 5 weeks, he's improved every week, 9.1, 13.2, bye week, 17.6, 25.9, and then last week, 42.8. Not to mention, I'm almost certain all that production came in the second half because I had Devontae Adams on my fantasy team. I saw he had 0 catches for 0 yards in the first half. I'm like, what the hell? I mean, but then I looked, Rodgers was like 3 for 8 for like 51 yards. So it's like, okay, he only has 3 completions. But in the second half, he put up 42 fantasy points. He put up almost 200 yards, the 9 catches, the 9 catches and the 2 touchdowns. I mean, just absolutely insane. Biggest thing that I've seen is consistency. Now they're going up against the Rams, who obviously just gave up 6 points to the 49ers, but I think that was a little bit of a fluke. Don't get me wrong. I think the Rams defense is good, but I think the Jets are just able to play loose knowing that they're not going to the postseason. And Devontae Adams is not going to put up 42.8 points, but I think he could put somewhere from that 17 to 25 points, which as a wide receiver 2, even possibly wide receiver 1, that's a good position. He's right in the fringe there. If he's in a 12-man league, he's technically the top wide receiver 2. Obviously his position right there at the 13th spot, but all in all, he's had great input throughout the year, even with his time with Las Vegas, and he's averaging 17.4 fantasy points, so I think of him as a trusted option. Now, I can't believe I have to say this, but I'm going to go with Tyreek Hill as my final must start because Tyreek Hill has had a really up and down year. Both you and I had mentioned that last year he would potentially be the guy that had 2,000 yards. Or was it this year? Was it this year or was it last year? Yeah. Last year that he would get 2,000 yards, obviously just shy of that, had a great year. This year, obviously dealt with the Tua injury bug. I mean, it plagued him really hard. He's also, I guess, been dealing with like a broken wrist or like something weird with his wrist. And I think they're going to shut him down when he's not playoff or when they're basically eliminated from the playoffs in general. But he's been really up and down, just not the Tyreek Hill that we're used to seeing. I mean, 16th position ranked wide receiver, still quote unquote good, but last week, I know for me and some other Tyreek Hill fantasy owners, 2 catches, 36 yards, laid an absolute egg, especially after the 2 weeks before, 28.1 and 20.3. I think he bounced back nicely, even at home against San Francisco. This is the last home game for Miami of the year. I think the biggest thing for Miami is obviously it's been a disappointing year, but I think they're going to give their fans a show. I think it's going to be a high-scoring game. The offense just hasn't clicked. On top of that, Tua had a little bit of a rough week last week, and I think he bounced back nicely. Overall, I think Tyreek Hill, gets anywhere from 8 to 10 receptions, 100-some yards, and a score. And I think a lot of people wouldn't ever sit Tyreek Hill, but I kind of want to throw in that note that I think he's going to be fine, even if he had a little bit of a slow start or even up and down year throughout the year. What about any sits?
First off, I'm going to go with Jalen Waddle. I mean, Tua bad game last week, but I agree with you. I think Tyreek's going to have a good game. I think he's a must start as well. But Waddle's just been so inconsistent. We saw how great he was his first couple of years in this year, and we saw end of last year, kind of him take a step back. And that's how it feels like it's been this entire season. Just kind of one of those guys who's, I won't say disappeared, but kind of disappeared. I mean, everyone thought Tyreek and Waddle was one of those best wide receiver duos in the league. And they were last year for the most part, and the year before that. But, I mean, Waddle, like I said, he's disappeared. Also going against the 49ers defense, who's only given up 17 passing touchdowns to 11 receptions. They've given up the least amount of passing yards in the NFL, just over 2,700. Just a bad matchup there. And then I'm going to go on the other side. I'm going to go with Deebo Samuel for the 49ers. I mean, Deebo's been the biggest disappointment. I remember seeing something earlier on Instagram. I want to say it's either yesterday or the day before. He has 1 receiving touchdown this year. he has as many receiving touchdowns as like 3 offensive linemen. I mean, they all have 1 receiving touchdown. That's offensive linemen. Last week, Dan Skipper, the left tackle or whoever he is, he scored more fantasy points than Deebo Samuel last week as an offensive lineman, having 1 catch for a touchdown. I mean, it's just embarrassing what we've seen out of Deebo. On top of that, good Miami pass defense, just over 3,000 yards given up, which is the ninth fewest given up. 16 touchdowns, 7 receptions. A good ratio, not a lot of passing touchdowns given up. Grant, when you look at teams who've given up 25 plus, 27, and been up in the mid to high 20s, being at 16, it's a good amount. I mean, or a great amount for that defense. And lastly, I'm gonna go with Isaiah Pacheco. Pacheco is just he's gained healthier. I get it, but Pacheco is going up. It's a weird matchup for Pacheco because I don't know how many like receptions he's going to get. He may get more now because with the injury to Patrick Mahomes being less mobile, they may want to hand it off a little bit more. But who knows? I mean, I wouldn't say this is a must-win game for the Chiefs because they've already basically secured their spot in the playoffs, only having that 1 loss. But against the Texans, this is a game where I would think Mahomes wants to try to come back and be strong because this offense has just been so questionable all year. And the run defense for the Texans has been great. I mean, Danielle Hunter being there, stepping up the middle. You got Will Anderson off the side or off at the end position. Just great run defense here by the Texans. They've only given up 7 rushing touchdowns, under 1,500 rushing yards this entire season. They've been great against running backs all year. And Pacheco is still splitting time with Kareem Hunt. I mean, Kareem Hunt's been more that receiving back. Pacheco, obviously, that furious runner that he is back there, runs angry all the time. But when you run angry against a really good linebacking group and a really good defensive line group, it's hard for him to get yards because he doesn't have those as many of those explosive plays. Maybe those every once in a while 10, 12 rushing yard plays up the middle because he runs over 2 guys, but he doesn't really get to the outside as much. That's more of Kareem Hunt's game in this offense. And like I said, not the receiving upside isn't really there. That's been more of Kareem's Hunt role.
So for my first one, I'm going to go with DK Metcalf. I feel like DK Metcalf had a good start to the year, obviously besides week 1, but week 2 and 3, 20.8.9, 20.4. Last 2 weeks has been pretty rough. 4 catches for 49 yards, 3 catches for 28 yards. First of all, I have no idea what's going on with the Seattle quarterback situation. I probably should have done some research on it, but I know Geno's, regardless if he's going to play or not, he's been banged up. Sam Howell looked terrible. He looked like hot garbage when he came in for mop-up duty against the Packers there on Sunday Night Football. Well, not even mop-up duty. His team single-handedly kind of helped get him back in there, and he looked so bad. And we've seen this year like how bad a backup quarterback is. Like it seems like I remember the days when like the Bills had like Case Keenum and there was like some good backup quarterbacks that like you would feel fine starting your fantasy players, but I don't really feel confident in much backups in the NFL to start their fantasy players. And that would be the case for Seattle. But even if Geno is healthy, that passing game really was not going anywhere last week besides JSN. And as JSN maybe evolving as a wide receiver 1, I really would want to see moving forward kind of what that looks like because DK Metcalf obviously either seems to have a really good week or really bad week. On top of that, Minnesota's defense is pretty solid, particularly when it comes to the pass. I mean, Brian Flores has done a great job of scheming that defense and really not allowing quarterbacks to have success. All in all, I think in a fantasy game, especially in the playoffs, it's too risky to start, Geno. You want to make sure, not Geno, DK. You want to make sure that there's a stable quarterback position first and foremost, but they're also going to top tier defense. I don't know if I'd risk it, in fantasy, especially in round 2. Secondly, again, another receiver that's just kind of up and down. I'm going to go with Devontae Smith. I mean, Devontae Smith has been really hit or miss for me in my fantasy league, and I feel like for a lot of fantasy owners. He looked great last week and solid the week before after missing those 2 games, but he's still a little bit spotty, right? He'll give you the upwards, like last week had his best game of the season, 11 catches, 109, 1 touchdown, by far the best game of his season, 28 fantasy points. Then he'll also give you, the weeks of 2 catches for 14 yards or 4 catches for 29 yards. It's again too risky. On top of that, they're going on the road against Washington, and Washington defense has done a pretty solid job this year. And it's a divisional matchup, which typically results in a low-scoring game. Obviously, there's been a lot going on with Jalen Hurts and A.J. Brown, and I think there's been an emphasis from Jalen Hurts to get A.J. Brown the ball, and I think that's going to continue. And so I would just kind of fade Devontae Smith a little bit. I would like to see at least another solid game to really consider starting him for my championship round. I just feel like, especially now, it's a little too risky, but if he's your only option, then I understand that. I personally sat him in one of my leagues just because I just couldn't trust him, especially when it comes down to this point where, you lose, you go home. So it's the amount of confidence level. Do you think he's going to do back-to-back performances of good weeks? There's got to be one of these weeks where he lays an egg, kind of like Tyreek Hill did last week. And I think at Washington before the end of the year against two divisional opponents in the Cowboys and Giants, which are a little bit easier of opponents, I think those are the games where he's going to have more success, and Washington would be kind of like that roadblock. And then finally, I'm going to go with DeAndre Swift. DeAndre Swift, I feel like just kind of got shown the door both in Detroit and in Philadelphia. Seemed for the most part, especially kind of in those middle weeks of the season, that DeAndre Swift kind of had a good home there in Chicago. They also got rid of Khalil Herbert to kind of free up some more opportunity for him. But that offense just has not been flowing. He hasn't had a touchdown in 4 games. I mean, actually 5 games technically. His last 4 games he hasn't scored. He's gotten the volume, right? 19 carries for 79 yards. Not really a factor in the PPR perspective as well. Now, they are going against Detroit, so there is opportunity for their offense to get going and score a lot of points. I just don't know how optimistic I'll feel, especially with how bad that Detroit defense had played. Because, yes, the injuries have plagued the Detroit Lions a lot, but this is still a really good team. And so for them to kind of deal with some injuries that they've been dealing with, I'm just kind of curious to see what happens with them moving forward. But for now, I just don't trust DeAndre Swift to get the job done, especially against that Lions front. Even if there are some secondary guys, this roster from top to bottom is very deep, and I think maybe DeAndre Swift needs to have a good game before you can count on him to be a consistent option game in and game out. What about sleepers?
My first sleeper, I don't know if you can put him as a sleeper now because he's had 300 rushing yard games, but Rico Dowdle. I think people aren't understanding how good these last 4 games, honestly, have been for him. He also has a really good matchup this week. He faces, sorry, I said it right here. He faces the Buccaneers, who isn't a great run defense. They've been middle tier in their run defense all year. They give him a good amount of touchdowns. Dowdle's been doing a little bit in the receiving game, not a whole bunch, but I mean, just the consistency that we've seen out of him, like I said, 300 yards last 3 weeks. Was 3 weeks ago in his first 100 rushing yard game was his first ever, and then you decided to have 2 more right afterwards. The carries have been there. I want to say his lowest carries the last 4 weeks has been 18, something like that, and he still had like 80 something yards or 100 yards in that game. Last week, I believe he had 25 rush attempts. I mean, the volume's just there, and that's all you really ask for out of your guys. Obviously, wide receivers and PPR, it's a little bit different. Because you get points per reception. But for running backs, for your fantasy, for playoffs like this, you just want the volume. You want the ball in your guys' hands, and hopefully you can go out there and make a play and go get you fantasy points. Next up, I'm going to go MVS, Marquez Valdez-Scantling. I mean, going against the Packers, it's going to be a little bit harder, especially being at the Packers, being in Green Bay. But it's one of those things. Rattler's been named the starting quarterback already, and we saw Rattler went in and did immediately once he took over for Jake Haener last week. He came in, I want to say, had 2 catches, 60-something yards. Those are the only 2 catches MVS did have because the Saints had like 20-something total yards in the first half. They went to Spencer Rattler after that, and then MVS had 62 receptions for 60 yards. I mean, they showed how explosive he can be. He is a big part of the offense, especially with a quarterback that's able to push the ball down the field like Rattler is. And this is going to be one of some of Rattler's last games to prove himself that the Saints don't need to go out and draft a quarterback in the next draft. It won't be in the first round, probably second, third round potentially. But if Rattler's able to go out and show that he is the guy, he should be the guy for next year, being the number 2 behind Derek Carr, because Carr's still under contract, but that he is the future here. This is Rattler's opportunity. Go into Green Bay, go play in the snow, and go beat them. And MVS is going to be the number 1 wide receiver there for that. And lastly, Brian Thomas Jr. I love Brian Thomas Jr. ever since the draft. That was my guy. Your guy was Ladd. My guy's Brian Thomas. Last week, 10 receptions over 100 yards, 2 touchdowns. Great week out of him. And that was with Mac Jones. I mean, Mac Jones has still been the quarterback, and it seems like they've been getting the ball with him a lot earlier on in games. In the first half, I remember multiple times him having maybe 1-2 receptions on only like 3 targets. He'd only have 2 or 3 targets. Last week, they targeted him early and often. I want to say he had like 50 yards and a touchdown in the first half, and then another 50 yards and a touchdown in the second half. And look what happens. They played a good game. They were able to move the ball down the field a good amount because they actually got one of their number 1 option, the wide receiver room, the ball a good amount. And they actually schemed him in. I think that carries over here, especially for a team that could potentially be going for that number 1 pick. I don't really know if they will be going for it. They're not in it at all. Obviously, with T-Law being out for the rest of the year, just the matchups, I wouldn't say is great, but it's a solid matchup against the Raiders. Raiders, who knows? It's really 50-50. In the past game, I've seen them shut down some teams, and I've seen them just give up like 400 yards to the other team's quarterback. So it's like I said, it's very 50-50, especially with Mac Jones being the quarterback. It's hard to say, but Brian Thomas, he's the number one option there. If he's able to get even half the volume that we saw last week, I think he had 13 targets. If he even has half of that for 3-4 catches, it seems like every game he also has like a 50-yard bomb at some point. I remember getting notifications like the last 3 weeks, like the first or second play of the second half. It was like Brian Thomas Jr. 52-yard reception. I've gotten like that same notification the last 3 weeks.
For me, I'm going to go with Michael Penix. Now, I know obviously I'm not the biggest Michael Penix fan, but I always say with these new quarterbacks is this is their opportunity to kind of like show themselves, especially early on, and have that breakout game. Not saying that's necessarily going to happen, but I think of all the quarterbacks, especially as of late, I'm most excited to see Penix just for a couple of reasons. One, because they benched my boy Kirk Cousins. Sad day. Secondly, they also drafted him with the 8th overall pick, which surprised everybody. Looks a lot better now. And thirdly, this guy's got the arm talent of like a superhero. This guy can chuck the ball. And we're talking like Joe Milton strength. And yes, I'm talking about Joe Milton because I love Joe Milton still. But Michael Penix can absolutely let the ball rip. He's got explosive weapons there. Like maybe this is how Michael Penix will get Kyle Pitts eventually going. Probably won't happen because nobody will get Kyle Pitts going. Drake London, I feel like at times he could be a little bit more explosive. They got guys like Darnell Rooney, Ray McLeod who've had good success. Bottom line is I think this offense is going to cook this week. I think, Michael Penix, regardless if they win or lose, is going to kind of showcase a lot of talent. But again, this is more of a risky pick. So this is more of a pick if you're kind of like trying to find a quarterback that could kind of save your fantasy team, or you're struggling to find a good quarterback. Not saying Penix is a tremendous quarterback, but I think this is the week to do it, especially as the Falcons take on the Giants, who obviously have just had a dismal year and are looking to get that number one pick. Secondly, I'm going to go with Romeo Doubs. Romeo Doubs has been injured a couple of times, especially as of late, but came back after missing 2 games against Seattle. 3 catches, 40 yards, 2 touchdowns, 19 fantasy points. Again, kind of touchdown reliant, kind of guy like Nick Westbrook-Ikine, but still 4 touchdowns on the year, has gotten some more receptions, more targets. I think there's a similar opportunity to do so against New Orleans. The one thing I will note is the fact that the Packers seem to run the football a lot more, but Romeo Doubs has kind of thrived in that when they have a successful running game. They're looking at guys like Jaden Reed. They're looking at guys like Dontavian Wicks or Christian Watson, and Romeo Doubs has kind of been that touchdown threat that Jordan Love has really relied upon. So I think there's another opportunity for success there. And then finally, I'm going to go with Jalen McMillan. Of course, basically once I drop him, he has good weeks back to back. Again, 4 catches, 59 yards, 2 scores. Last week, 5 for 75 and a score. He's kind of emerged himself as that wide receiver 2 with Chris Godwin being out. Him and Mike Evans have really kind of connected really well and done a good job and really kind of brought this Bucs team back. And I think, going into Dallas, it's going to be a difficult situation. Don't get me wrong, but I think Jalen McMillan has proven in back-to-back weeks that he's a reliable option that the Bucs can use moving forward. And he's hot. Again, maybe more of a flex option, but he's rostered in 29.4% of leagues. He might be a roster or worth a roster spot just in that. And if somebody were to go down with injuries or make a last-second adjustment, Jalen McMillan could fill into that spot very nicely. What about your bus?
First one, I'm going DeAndre Swift. Last time they played Detroit at Detroit, 2 receptions for 35 yards, 11 rush attempts for 39. What really saved him was his receiving yards, basically doubling those rush yards. Plus, if you're in PPR, those 2 extra points there. I still expect him to have those explosive plays. That was also that game where I believe they came back at the end of the game and Swift kind of just got faded out. I like the other running backs there. Swift kind of just been kicked to the wayside every single team he's been on up to this point, which I don't really understand because Swift has shown promise here and there, but then there's times where you don't know what he's really going to do. I mean, he had that big year in Philly where he finally broke 1,000 yards, but he's never been a big touchdown guy. He has 800 yards, so there's a chance he does break 1,000 this year again. I just don't like the matchup, divisional matchup. Lions coming off of not a bad loss, but a loss to the Bills that really hurts. They need to win this game to not seal the division. I think it's still open, obviously, with their Vikings there, but this is a huge game for them. I mean, with another divisional win, it brings one step closer to be able to win the division and secure their spot in the playoffs. Next up, I'm going to go with Najee Harris. Last time Najee played the Ravens. It was kind of like with the Swiss thing, where it was more the receiving yards that saved him. He did have 63 rushing yards, so a solid amount, but 4 catches for 30 yards. He had more on the receiving end than he did on the rushing. And as well, like he only had like a few rush attempts. He had 18 rush attempts for 63 yards, only averaging 3.5 yards per carry. So solid numbers, but not great. In this game, they will be playing at home. Last game, or sorry, they will be playing in Baltimore. Last time they played was in Pittsburgh. But another huge divisional game. Two teams that are trying to lock up that division. They're both right there. Najee's, again, I would say every time Najee, how I explain him, he's going to get you 1,000 yards every year. He's going to get you right around 8 touchdowns, but he's not going to do it in flashy ways. Every once in a while, he'll have a 150-yard rushing game or 200 total yards with like 2 touchdowns every once in a while. Najee's one of those guys. He's going to consistently get you that 1,000 to 1,100 yards, but like I said, it's not going to be sexy. He's just going to go out and have solid games, give you 60 yards, a couple of receptions for like 20, 25 yards each week. He's not a great fantasy option because of that. He's just a great football player because he's so consistent like that, but he's not a great fantasy option, unfortunately. And lastly, I'm going to go with DeAndre Hopkins. Hopkins has been so up and down, I feel like, this year, especially with Travis Kelce, him emerging the last couple of weeks. I expect this to be a big Travis Kelce game also. Kelce, I think, is 1 touchdown away from being the all-time touchdown record for tight ends, or maybe it's for the entire, or in general, receiving touchdowns in Chiefs history. He's 1 touchdown away. He's tied with Tony G right now for the most touchdowns by a tight end. I know that. He just needs one more. It's been like this for the past like 3 to 4 weeks, and it's just like, when is he going to get that touchdown? When is he going to get that touchdown? I think it's going to be this week that he's going to go out and get that touchdown. I said DeAndre Hopkins. It's been weird. Like he could have really turned it around. I want to say it's either last week or the week before. There's a big play. He caught it, and then the ball was knocked out loose on like the 2-yard line. It was an incomplete catch, and that would have really helped him out. Like last week, 5 receptions, 36 yards. The volume was there, but didn't really do much about 4 receptions, 32 yards, a touchdown. Touchdown really saved him. And then against the Raiders, it's the Raiders, but he had 9 targets, 4 receptions for 90 yards. Like the targets have been there, just the receptions haven't been there. If the receptions have been there, the yards haven't been there. There's always been one thing that's been missing each week. It's either a touchdown, no yards, and almost no receptions, or it's a lot of receptions and no yards, or it's a good amount of yards with not a lot of receptions. It's just he just hasn't put it all together yet.
So for me, my 3 busts are going to be 3 quarterbacks. The first of which is going to be CJ Stroud. Look, I'm done with the CJ Stroud hype. I should have been done with it a long time ago. Well, let's just actually say I wasn't even a part of the CJ Stroud hype. I was just saying, maybe there's an opportunity for him to have success and gain it. He just hasn't found it yet. He's going through that sophomore slump that I said was going to happen. I mean, even if he has the yards, he has the turnover problem. If he doesn't have the yards, he doesn't have the turnover problem. But he's always hovered around that 13.7 fantasy points, which is just not going to cut it, especially in 12-man leagues, especially in a day and age of running quarterbacks. It's just not going to be there. On top of that, this matchup, he's going into Kansas City, which is not going to be fun for him as well. Kansas City, obviously not known for their defense, but I think Spags has done a great job with that defense, and I think that's going to continue. So I think it's about time we pull the plug on CJ Stroud. Secondly, this is another kind of obvious one. It's Anthony Richardson. I mean, again, time to pull the plug on Richardson, in my opinion. It's always a safe option just strictly from his rushing value, because the last 2 weeks, 9 carries, 48 yards and a score, 7 carries, 46 yards and a score. But the passing has just been terrible. 4 interceptions the last 2 games, 109, 172 yards, and 2 touchdowns against New England. Going against Tennessee, I mean, Tennessee's got a better defense. It's just their offense has been so bad. Their defense is kind of stretched to the point. It's going to be a tough game. I really do believe so. And again, if he doesn't have any rushing value, he's screwed. So I would definitely shy away from him. And then finally, this is kind of a mixture of the two, but it's just going to be the quarterbacks from the Jags and Raiders game. I mean, seriously, this is like battle of the shitters at this point. I think Jacksonville's the only team that seems to want to win just because they actually have talent on their team. The Raiders, they gave the Falcons every chance. They needed to win, and vice versa. And the Raiders, I mean, Desmond Ritter's a starting quarterback that, wow. I mean, the ghost of Desmond Ritter, he looked terrible as well. Mac Jones has looked bad. Desmond Ritter has looked bad. I'm just probably going to watch 5 seconds of this game, maybe because I got Brian Thomas Jr. in my lineup going or something. That's the only reason I'm watching this game. Definitely not to watch the quarterback play, but for some reason you have quarterbacks there, you might as well go with CJ Stroud or Anthony Richardson because that's just going to do you no good. And that wouldn't surprise me. It's like a 10-7 game, and Jags come away with the win or something like that. But thank you guys for listening to another episode of The Truth. If you guys did enjoy it, make sure you follow The Truth on Twitter, The Truth as one, to stay up to date with the latest information regarding The Truth, including podcast dates, podcast uploads, and other important information you don't want to miss. Make sure you guys also follow The Truth on Instagram and TikTok at the.tt.truth. Are you looking to find a drink that offers peak hydration, raises your energy level, speeds up your recovery, and keeps your mind sharp through focus and memory? Look no further than Acid Rainwater. I'm excited to partner with Bloodline Sports, AZ, and Acid Rainwater, which focuses on peak hydration and productivity, while also maintaining an ecosystem-friendly product. Use code HESSON15, that's HESSON15 for 15% off every purchase. As always, I'm your host, the one you love the most, Niall Hesson, joined once again by AJ Ponciano. Take care and good night.